everyone. Welcome back to Fix It in Post. I'm Isaac.
I am the Dan.
And we are joined today by the man who literally wrote the book on synthesizer sequences and drum machines, Mr. Dean Friedman. How are you?
I am very well, gentlemen, and good to speak to you from across the pond.
To you as well. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, not just one book, multiple books on synthesizers, right?
Multiple books, yeah.
Well, it kept me busy after I got kicked off my record label after McDonald's Girl was banned by the BBC.
They kicked you off for that. I heard the story, but yeah, I didn't know you got kicked off your label for it.
Yeah, they dropped me along with about 80 other artists that were at the time signed to CBS here in the States.
God.
So that was just due to the trademark issue of using the word McDonald's.
It was that and a whole slew of other ridiculous things, but it did set me on a path of exciting and strange multimedia endeavors.
So that's how the other stuff all came about then.
Indeed, yeah.
I only really knew you as a solo artist. And then the more I researched, it ended up going down a deeper and deeper rabbit hole of these crazy, interesting things. And we're like, okay, video games one side, and then the crazy musical instruments and stuff the other side. The honk blat and the booble.
Yeah.
Well, you know what, guys? All these things are these multimedia pursuits that I'm really proud of. They were a lot of fun, and they were really cutting edge in terms of the technologies at the time. But they were all pretty much inadvertent. It really, resulted, as I say, from all this free time I suddenly had, sort of being abandoned and exiled from the music business. And at the time, I was really fascinated with what then in the mid-'80s was the most powerful synthesizer on the market, the Synclavier by New England Digital. And I couldn't afford to buy one because they cost about $50,000 just for the low-end version of it.
God.
But I managed to make a deal with a guy named David Nichtern. David Nichtern is this great songwriter. He wrote a song called Midnight on the Oasis that Maria Muldaur had a big hit with. But he also was very much into music synthesis, and he became the North American rep for the Synclavier. So he had a studio in Manhattan, and I managed to make an arrangement with him where I would go once a week and rent an hour of time on this beautiful multi-timbral synthesizer until I got pretty adept at it. And then that sort of led to all these other things, including the synthesizer books and a bunch of articles.
And what got you interested in the first place, wanting to play it? Or did you just try one out at some point and decide it was cool?
I saw one in the studio and I started playing it and fooling around with it. It had so many buttons and knobs.
That's always fun.
At first it was a little bit intimidating, but it made all these great sounds. So I just was committed to learning more about it. And, week after week, over a period of time, I became gradually versed in the technology. And one day a phone call came into the studio. It was from Music Sales, a major music book publishing company. And they were looking for someone to author a book on the new synthesizers that were all popping out, because this was around 85, 86.
I guess not many people knew what they were, really. Or I don't know what the adoption was like. They didn't like it because it was electronic, or... Well,
they were brand new. MIDI, which is the Musical Instrument Digital Interface, had just come about. And the DX7, the Yamaha DX7 synthesizer, exploded as a consumer synthesizer. And so suddenly there were all these popular synths that people were trying to understand and learn about. But there was not a lot of ready-hand access to knowledge. So this phone call came through to the office, and the secretary said, well, Dean seems to know a lot about these synthesizers. Even though I didn't, I only knew this one synthesizer. But I managed to talk myself into a book deal with Music Sales. And it forced me to learn everything I could in a really short time frame. And fortunately, I was a quick study. And I think in part because it was all new to me, I was able to explain it in very much layman's terms. And I think that's why the books were very well received. So first came the Complete Guide to Synthesizer Sequencers and Drum Machines, where I pretty much explained all these new synths and all these electronic music devices that were just proliferating.
How did you research them? Yeah. Where did you get the information from back then? Because you couldn't just Google it.
Well, I called up the manufacturers and I got them to send me one.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's great. A great job then.
Oh, yeah.
For about 6 months while I was researching the book, every day, a FedEx or UPS truck would show up in front of the house with a huge box of a brand new synthesizer.
Brilliant.
Nice.
It was really exciting. It was kind of like Christmas every day. I barely had time to go through each and every manual, but I was very dedicated about doing that. So over that period of time, I really did acquire a pretty good knowledge of the state-of-the-art synthesizers that were then available, for consumers and on a semi and completely pro level across the board. And the guide that I wrote was quickly adapted as the go-to reference for all the new synths that were coming out there. And then the follow-up was called Synthesizer Basics, which was simply trying to explain what all these instruments had in common.
Okay.
In terms of how they generated sound and the different approaches, but with ultimately the same principles of sound. An envelope is an envelope and a filter is a filter. So as I say, because I was just wrapping my head around these electronic music principles, I think I was able to explain in a way that was relatable to the typical musician. And that's the feedback that I've gotten ever since.
Yeah. And I think that still holds today, which is crazy because the amount that technology's moved on. But you check out like the comments on, say, like the intro to synthesis video you did, the comments on that, people saying how useful it is, they're understanding it way better after watching like hundreds of videos. And I think it is like what you said with because you'd learned it fairly recently, you could explain it a lot better in layman's terms.
Precisely. And the thing that really tickles me is that I wrote the book in about 1986. Around that time, I did a 3-part Intro to Synthesis video series trying to elaborate on the book, but talking about the same principles and approach. Then like 30 years later, I got an email from some guy in Norway who had purchased one of the VHS 3-set Intro to Synthesis series back in the 80s. He said, "Can I have your permission to post these on YouTube?" And I said, "Sure, that's great."
Oh, cool. Okay, so you actually got your permission, yeah.
Yeah, no, he asked permission, and they, to my surprise and delight, the videos went viral all over the world. And as you say, because even though the technology in terms of microprocessors and the hardware has evolved significantly over that 30-year period, now going on 40 years, the physics of sound did not change one iota.
Yeah. No, it can't, I guess. I guess the physics can never really change. The basic principles are always going to be the basic principles.
Right. And so as a result, the things that I explained and talked about are just as relevant today as they were 30 plus years ago. And they've become the go-to reference to teach, young beginning synthesizers and producers and hip hop and electronica EDM artists all over the world. In fact, every few days I get email from Tokyo or Moscow or Sydney, Australia, really all over the world. People just, expressing their appreciation for explaining what might seem like difficult topics, but in a pretty easy to digest way.
That's got to make you feel good, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
But like there's sort of the added humor in it. I was watching a bit of it and insanely informational. I would recommend it to anyone getting into synthesizers, even if you only use like plugins or you're just using software. It's still relevant.
Absolutely. It relates to plugins as well as hardware. There's no question about it. But as you say, because the material is essentially so dry, I did make a lame effort to infuse some humor, albeit ridiculous, dumb humor, silly humor.
Oh, I did enjoy it. I did enjoy that. It keeps you engaged though when, as you said, maybe the topic's getting a bit too too boring, a bit too black or white, and then the humor keeps you listening. And also the 80s style is hilarious.
Well, that was inadvertent, like I said in the beginning.
Yeah. How do you feel about plugins then? This is something I've been interested to ask you as someone who you sort of started around the beginning of synths. How do you feel about just the software plugins now?
Do you use modern plugins and stuff?
I use them all the time in my most recent recording, American Lullaby. Sometimes they can be a little overwhelming, but I approach them the same way I did any outboard hardware gear, which is, once you understand what, the faders and knobs and controllers and parameters affect by experimenting and reading the manual, it really still comes down to using your ears.
Yeah.
Keep fiddling around until you hear what it is you want to hear. Sometimes it's trial and error. Sometimes it's by design. But it really still comes down to your ears as opposed to the plugin. I have, a list of favorite plugins that I just use by default.
What are they?
Can you give us a couple names?
Oh my God. Well, you know what? I'd have to open up my sequencer because I don't remember all their names. They're all abbreviated. But I'm also, they're always coming out with new ones.
Yeah.
I'm not averse to trying something and just, seeing how it works. I'll start with a preset if there are some presets in the ballpark of what I'm going for.
That's interesting.
But then I'm not shy about messing around and twiddling things and making them all work.
Because you do get some people who say, who are totally against presets.
Look, I started recording at CBS Studios on 52nd Street with 2-inch 16-track tape decks and big giant reels of tape that I wasn't even allowed to put on the tape deck. There was
you have an engineer there
union
doing it
job in the studio. The tape guy, he wasn't even the engineer. He was just the tape guy. And he was the only one that could hit play, record, and stop. Even the artist was not allowed to do it. But simply to make the point is that, I've seen many generations of the technology evolve and grappled with those philosophical quandaries of, is a sample as good as using a live instrument?
Yeah.
And, there are always issues that you can question and address. Ultimately, I've come to the point where just what I said before is that if it sounds right to you, you have to use your ears more than anything else. It's not about philosophy. It's about what it sounds like to you.
Yeah.
It depends on the context. But if you can get a sampled sound to do the job you're looking for, well, then use the sample because it's going to be a lot cheaper than, hiring a studio and orchestra for, $10,000 a session.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Or spending hours trying to recreate it.
Having said that, there are things, in terms of certain parts and certain gestural performance parameters that you can't really simulate. You can get close, but depending on the part, some things you can get away with, some things you can't. For example, an instrument like a banjo, there are some good banjo samples out there. There are even some good, MIDI sequences that you can plug in that will simulate, a convincing banjo riff. But it's got to be in the right context. It's got to sit in the right place in the mix.
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is that I have a tune that requires a banjo. My first option is going to go to a live banjo because it'll just make life easier and it'll sound better.
Yeah.
But again, there are instances where it's not the case. And I'll also readily admit that in my last album, my recent album, American Lullaby, which is very acoustic keyboard based, for the very first time in my recording career, and this was my ninth studio album. Even though I've got a beautiful 6-foot Kawai grand piano in my live room adjacent to my studio that I've used on all my previous home studio albums, and it sounds great. It's resonant and you hear all the dynamics and the attack. The sample that I finally wound up using on the new album of the acoustic piano sound, which was a Garrison piano sample, was so pristine and so rich and developed in terms of its harmonics and dynamics and its playability and the ambient sound that ultimately I just decided to use it throughout the album. And even knowing that it's a sample, there are hardly any instances where listening back, having done it myself, where I can tell or where I think it would be hard for anyone to distinguish throughout this album what's live and what's a sample.
That's crazy when the keyboard starts sounding better than the actual instrument.
It's not that it sounds better,
but it doesn't sound different. Yeah.
If it sounds just as good for 95% of the applications, then just purely from a production process, it makes my life almost 100 times easier.
I guess there's no messing around with microphones and things like that.
Yeah, and just having the remote aspects of it, all those extra variables that are sometimes difficult to control, and not the least of which is editing. I'm not the greatest piano player in the world, so if I'm doing a complicated accompaniment for one of my tracks on a keyboard, it sure makes my life easier if I can go back and edit it and still have it sound just as good in terms of editing the MIDI file as opposed to editing the actual audio.
Yeah, that makes sense. Does Dean Friedman quantize?
Ooh.
Do I quantize? I definitely do, depending on the content.
Right.
Okay.
On the track and the nature of the part. First, the nature of the track and the nature of the part. if it's in the realm of a really strictly metered pop track,
Oh, yeah.
then I'll definitely start with if either a click or a drum loop or a drum sequence or build a drum sequence, and so that'll it'll be either quantized or I'll use just a good sounding live sample and loops,
Okay.
of which I use plenty of on the new album. There's a lot of tracks that most people would assume were live, particularly some of the jazz tracks, where I spent a lot of hours finding the right live loops that I could build a basic track from. And same with the acoustic bass sounds. There's all the acoustic bass, in fact, all the bass on the album are samples.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
And including the acoustic bass, which are really convincing. But again, to my mind, and again, it depends on the part, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. But for the acoustic bass tracks, particularly the ones that are very jazz inflected, and there's a lot of jazz inflected tracks on the new album, it's a combination of A, the kind of part that I'm playing, B, the articulation of that part, even if I'm playing it on a keyboard and triggering samples. It's the nature of the part, the articulation of the part, the kind of dynamics that you can impose in that part.
I think that's the problem with a lot of heavily quantized music. You lose that articulation, especially with chords where you'd play like each note just only like milliseconds apart to get the better feeling of that chord.
What you can do nowadays, a lot of DAWs, a lot of music software have an option called Humanize, where you can actually you can write in these MIDI components and then you can highlight it all and you can hit the Humanize button and it will create that articulation. It will move the samples to be milliseconds apart to give it more of a real human effect.
Depending on the track, the context, and the instrument, I'll use whatever works. And so there are instances where I'll quantize. But getting back to what I said earlier, it tends to happen earlier as I'm laying down tracks. It tends to be more drum related.
Right.
Because once I have those basic elements, then I prefer having a more live feel as I'm layering the other elements of it. Having said that, I will do plenty of editing because, as I say, I'm not the greatest instrumentalist.
It's reassuring to hear. Yeah.
So I make sure to tighten those tracks up. But if I start with a live track, it's going to breathe a lot better than a purely quantized track, unless I'm doing an obvious kind of dance track, which I don't do that many of. But on occasion, there'll be something in there that really does have to be tight. And then I'll make it tight.
I do like that. Listening through some of your catalog, trying to work out what genre you are exactly. It kind of it falls a bit all over the place.
Getting the feedback. I'd like to know. Let me tell you myself.
I wouldn't know. But yeah, does anyone say you have to make a certain track, or is it's literally whatever you want to do? You can just sit down and just start playing. Oh, I want to make this track today. I want to make a dance track today, or I want to make it like a country song.
Well, in the early days, I was often accused of being a little too eclectic, but it's something I always took as a compliment because I just love all kinds of music.
Yeah,
sure.
It doesn't matter the genre or the idiom. I just grew up listening to everything. My influences were really eclectic. My mom was a singer and performer on Broadway and film and a trained coloratura soprano. So there was classical music and Broadway show tunes on the piano. And then once I got a transistor radio, I was listening to all the top 40 and everything else that I could find on the dial. And anyone that's familiar with my albums, as opposed to just the radio hits, will know that it runs the gamut, in terms of rock, pop, folk, country, jazz.
It's nice. You never know what you're going to get, especially on shuffle.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, that's a point of pride. I just never understood people being prejudiced against one idiom or the other.
You never had like a label saying to you, no, you have to make, you're a country or you're a rock guy. You have to stick to this.
Well, I've had labels say, we're just not sure where to put you in a record store. Where do we rack you? Do we put you here? Do we put you there?
That is a good point. Yeah, I would struggle. Is there an unknown section?
Yeah, that might be where I am in a miscellaneous or unknown.
Yeah, the MISC. Let's just file that under MISC.
For the first two albums, my attitude was that I was just going to write songs, tell stories. And I was fortunate is that each of the first two albums generated a chart hit somewhere on the planet.
Nice.
And then when the third album came out, that's when, I was dropped and it was banned. But even that album wound up 30 years later generating hit records when McDonald's Girl finally came out. So that's always been my attitude, that there's something commercial on every one of my albums, but I don't set out to necessarily write a commercial tune. I'm really just writing songs telling stories, and it depends on what the needs of the story are as to what musical idiom it is. Now, sometimes I'll just start with a musical riff that's in that sort of pop realm. That will determine the direction of the song. It's not always lyric based. It really depends on the song. Every song is different. But because I never felt restricted in terms of musical idiom, it really made it more fun for me and more interesting, because I got to explore all these different musical idioms and try to understand them better, what characteristics, enlivened them. It also was reinforced when I was invited to do music for the TV series Boone that starred Michael Elphick and Neil Morrison.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Because they specifically, even though it took place in Birmingham and Nottingham and had Michael Elphick riding around, the character Boone on his motorcycle, the theme of it was that he envisioned himself as a cowboy in the Wild West riding off into the sunset to save some fair maiden. And so they specifically wanted country western music.
Okay.
I'm not exactly sure why they asked me. I guess they figured I was American. I must know country music, western music. Fortunately, I did. I spent a lot of time at the Philly Folk Festival, and I was a big fan of Doc Watson, and so was very familiar with the country idiom. And so put on my cowboy hat and wrote a bunch of country western tunes for the TV show. And had so much fun doing that it just became sort of a regular part of my offerings.
Do they get you to do the sound effects and stuff as well, or you just strictly the music?
Oh, well, all the harmonica stuff, bum, ba-dum, bum, 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 that was me.
Yeah, that sort of stuff. Oh, okay, cool. I've said before that would be like a dream job for me, doing a soundtrack for something. Most of the time, whatever the scene puts in your head, you can just go start playing.
You can just do it, yeah.
Exactly, and it was great fun, and also really liberating. Because when I'm preparing a Dean Friedman album, it might sound strange because I feel a lot of liberty and license to do stuff, but at the end of the day, I realized people still expect something vaguely resembling a Dean Friedman song.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get stuck in that way. You're sort of writing to please the fans you already have as well.
Well, I'm conscious that this kind of vocabulary that they're accustomed to, but when you're scoring for TV or a low budget horror film like a Board of Vampire Motorcycle,
oh yeah,
well then you're scoring to picture and you're serving the needs of whatever is on screen. And in a way, that's really liberating because you're no longer staring at a blank page deciding what to do. You have a particular brief that you're trying to accomplish, and that's dictated by the film or the video.
See, I was wondering, it was part of the reason you used a synth keyboard instead of an acoustic piano for the latest album was anything to do with COVID. Because I know some people, they've had trouble accessing the usual studios they go to, or their engineers, their masters can't get there, producers, trouble traveling, etc. And you released it like right in the middle of 2021.
It impacted the album in a couple of ways. For one, by virtue of the lockdown and not being able to go anywhere or invite anyone into the studio, it gave me the opportunity to spend more time recording than I have had occasion to on any other album. And this is my 9th studio album.
Okay.
Over like 40 plus years.
Do you usually go to the actual, to a proper studio then?
My last 5 albums have been home studio recordings, but in part because I was doing everything for the most part solo, with some exceptions, which I'll elaborate on. More than that, the fact that I had to cancel a 40-city tour.
God,
yeah, I was going to ask about touring.
Gave me the luxury of spending all that time in the studio. And normally that never would have been the case. Normally I'm looking at the calendar, scrambling to reach a deadline to be able to mix and master and send it off to be manufactured in time for hitting the road and having stock on at the gigs. Normally, there's that kind of a tight deadline. So in this instance, the lockdown, by virtue of keeping me off the road, really let me spend more time than ever engaging with the material. And that was really satisfying and a lot of fun. And I feel like that the result reflects that in terms of the detail I was able to achieve in terms of production, in terms of creating these soundscapes. Because it's not just the tracks, there's a lot of interstitial elements to the album that set up the tracks. And those things took time and attention to detail, which normally I don't have in a typical schedule. The other aspect of it had to do with that remote aspect of it, which is that even though I wasn't able to invite people into the studio, I was fortunate and be able to enlist the help of almost a dozen really talented musicians from around the world who were able to contribute tracks, recording their parts remotely, and then send them in for me to assemble.
So did you mix it as well?
I did. I mixed everything,
Right.
and essentially mastered it as well. And the DAW that I use, which is Sonar by Cakewalk, now known as BandLab.
Okay, that's an unusual choice.
Well, you know what? I've used it for years, and I got sick of having to learn new programs.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I venture to say it's as powerful as any mainstream, Pro Tools or...
Sure, yeah.
Cubase, yeah. I do think at this point they all pretty much can do exactly the same things. It's just knowing where the options are, where are the buttons, how do you... Where to find what you need to do. So now it's just come down to preference.
Yeah, it's just a different interface for the same bloody thing.
Well, you know what? I went through a period of time because, again, I started with two-inch tape, where every time the technology evolved, I would learn a new platform and then it would be abandoned. One of my first sequencers was on the Amiga computer. Then they stopped making the Amiga computer. Then I went to opcode, and then they stopped making opcode.
After a while, you had got enough of it.
I did. I finally said, you know what? This Sonar program is really powerful. It works beautifully. I know it. Again, what happened is Cakewalk sold the company to BandLab. And at first I was really depressed and nervous, and I'm thinking, oh, here they are. They sold it again. It's going to be abandoned, and I'll have to learn a new platform. But amazingly, to their great credit, BandLab has not only supported ongoing maintenance of the platform, they have improved it and continue to develop Sonar, aka Cakewalk. On top of that, a program that used to cost, $700-800 or pounds, is now free as part of the BandLab package, which costs nothing. And it's hard to believe that a free DAW is as powerful as all the expensive platforms that are out there. But I'm telling you, and I believe American Lullaby is evidence of it, that it's true.
You definitely wouldn't have thought the album is produced on a free piece of software. That's insane.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is. So, any of your listeners out there thinking of investing in something, unless you aspire to be an engineer in a studio that uses the mainstream platforms, then you do well to seriously consider Sonar, because it really kicks ass.
I'm going to have to check it out. It's something I never really considered. I only really thought about the top four, say Pro Tools, Cubase, Logic, and the other one.
The other one.
The one I use.
Yeah, I use Logic, but I'm going to have to check it out, yeah.
I can't recommend it any higher, just because it does the job. It's got a great intuitive interface.
Proof is in the pudding. If you listen to American Lullaby and you like the production, you can get it for free.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move on to what was in the last episode the sound synopsis. But I believe, Dean, we had a little chat before we started, and you recommended that we change the name of our sound synopsis to the Astute Audio Insight, and I really like that. So let's go with that.
Okay.
See what insight we have gathered.
Yeah, let's see what astute insight we have gathered on this audio. Should we start with Dreamers Hotels by Enter Shikari?
Sure.
Oh, okay. I was really interested to hear what Dean might think of this, because this is...
Yeah, me too. That's why I said to start with it.
This is sort of synthesizers to the other extreme.
Well, I'll say this. It's got a great hook, and it's a terrific video. I mean, it's a really engaging video.
Oh, you watched the video as well? Yeah.
I did, absolutely. Having said that, I have to acknowledge that personally, I'm in a different phase of life. I have less outrage.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And it's definitely aspired to a little more peace and harmony. But I get it, because I've been there, and I admire just the verve with which they put the song over. And it is a really powerful track. So again, great hook, terrific video, and God bless them.
Okay, all right. I wasn't sure what you'd think of the sound design coming from sort of synthesizers just being used to copy instruments to now it's just become its own thing, and they're just making music out of strange noises, which kind of reminiscent of your special effects song in some of the samples.
I guess you could make that analogy, sure. Why not?
Yeah, it's a good track. I mean, Dan, you've been telling me to listen to Shikari for fucking years, and recently I have actually started to listen to them more. It's a good track. I like it. It's interesting.
It crackles. That's what struck me about the track. It crackles. And by that I mean it's like a transformer got hit by lightning and there's sparks flying around.
Yeah.
I like that.
There's a lot of energy in there. But like I say, that outrage component of it is something that, I'm less enamored of these days. I might have wholly embraced it in my wayward youth.
Fair enough. I mean, yeah, they are a band. They say they like to, break down the walls of genres, music genres.
Mm.
Yeah, you can listen to different songs by them and you wouldn't know where to categorize them either. They sort of started off maybe a bit more metal-y and then they went kind of really soft and now they're hugely electronic. And it's just a blend of everything and then mashed together.
They're talented. I mean, you don't achieve that by taking no chances and the easy way out. You got to respect that.
Yeah.
They do, yeah. They sort of keep up with all the synth kind of things. When I first saw them, they had a whole like wall of electronics, and then the singer is playing with all the different switches and knobs on that, making crazy sounds sort of during the breaks of songs. And yeah, it's fun.
So, what did you think of the Adele track? I think it was called "Easy on Me."
First of all, and this will come as a surprise to absolutely no one on the planet Earth, she sings beautifully.
Yeah.
Yeah, no one can deny.
I love her voice. It's filled with texture and raw emotion, impeccable phrasing and intonation. Now, I have to confess that in terms of her songwriting, I used to dismiss it as just serviceable. But over time, I've really evolved to acknowledge that it's deceptively a lot more sophisticated than it might seem at first listen. And that's even within her very strict pop harmonic vocabulary. She really does write these sublime melodies over really interesting and compelling changes.
And it's the dynamic range in the vocals. It's not sort of kept at one level.
Right, yeah.
But on the face of it, as you say, it's just vocals and a piano, but
underneath it's a lot more than that.
Yeah.
But I used to think that her songwriting worked because it serviced her vocals.
Right.
Yeah.
And I used to sort of dismiss it as that. Well, it's not a great song, but she's writing for her own voice and it works well. But as I really grew more accustomed to her songwriting, I realized I was wrong and that the songs themselves are really well written, melodically, harmonically. And even though it's in a particular harmonic vocabulary idiom that she kind of stays in for the most part, she's a great songwriter. I only have one complaint, which is I pray that 5 years from now, when she comes out with a new next album,
35,
I pray that she writes at least one song that's not exclusively about a personal heartbreak and tumultuous.
Yeah, that's the only thing that does.
One song, just any topic will do, any topic at all. Adele, really, I love you and respect you. Please write about something else just once for me.
You need to tweet this to Adele immediately.
Yeah. As
for Easy on Me in particular, again, it's beautifully written, superbly sung, but it's still sort of an apology for self-centered behavior. But, someone whose status and financial circumstances makes it possible for her to prioritize her own needs over those of all the others in her immediate circle, including her ex-husband and her son.
Good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to acknowledge it's kind of a selfish kind of say, all right, well, listen, I'm going to do this. It's going to be, it's going to transform your lives. But go easy on me.
I originally chose this song because in the previous episode, we were speaking about the loudness was in mastering. And I came across some stuff that sort of hinted that this track peaks. And so I listened to it sort of in passing and thought, oh yeah, that peaks a bit. But then listening to it closer, I think that's just...
Have they changed the mix?
No, I think it's just her style of singing. It's weird. When I first listened to it, I wasn't fully focusing. And when I actually focused on it, and it wasn't distorting, it wasn't the peaks, it was just her style of vocals and the way that it sounds.
Yeah, because I listened to it after you'd said about it clipping in certain places, and I'm sure I'd read that somewhere else as well. But then I listened to it closely, I couldn't hear it.
Yeah, I couldn't hear it either when I listened.
it wouldn't be the only time that they've changed the version they've uploaded.
That's true. Maybe that's what they did then. Maybe they did just fucking swap it out for a better version.
Yeah, I'd read this somewhere else that the song clips in certain points. Her voice starts clipping, and it's because they overcompressed it, trying to get the loudness.
That's exactly how it sounded to me. That's what I was, speaking about last episode.
When you're dealing with a voice like Adele's, I'm sure there are many occasions where a producer, engineer is faced with a difficult choice because her voice, she has such great dynamic range that even with the quickest compressors, sometimes you're going to find yourself having to choose between a performance that is awesome but peaks and one that is less alive and is within that range.
Yeah.
As long as that peak or slight distortion is not discernibly a distortion and taking away from the listening experience, then you got to really be biased towards the excitement of a live emotive performance. So I would suspect that that's the kind of issues that they deal with on her vocal track.
I mean, live, you'd notice as she gets to the louder parts, she moves the microphone further away from her face.
Well, that's just good mic technique.
Yeah.
And you do that in the studio as well.
Oh, right. Okay. I didn't think people did that in studio so much. I thought that was just, that was more of a live technique.
Well, it's not, you're dealing with a mic on a stand as opposed to a handheld mic.
Yeah.
But I know when I'm going full throttle, I'll navigate the distance between my voice and the microphone.
Yeah.
I'll back off or turn slightly askew if I'm really hitting it. And you kind of do that naturally because otherwise you're constantly going to wind up compressing the best part of the line.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, not everybody does it. I'm not going to name names, but I have seen several people live and they'll rely on the mixing guys to sort that out for them. And that can get a little bit messy.
Oh, it can get messy as fuck, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's mic technique. And I'm only really self-conscious of it because I'm also doing my own engineering. So if I fuck it up in the recording, it gives me more headaches.
It's you that's going to deal with it, yeah.
So it's sort of preemptive mic technique.
It's a pretty good solution to well, I guess it's not a solution to a problem if you're avoiding creating a problem in the first place.
Yeah.
We've got Dean's song to get some insight on. Dean's choice.
Yeah. When we were speaking about arranging this, you sent us a track that you wanted us to listen to by Jess Silk.
Right. I sent you that track because I just first heard Jess Silk perform on a webcast hosted by Attila the Stockbroker, who's just a world-renowned punk poet.
Oh,
right.
Okay.
You should check out his stuff. He's terrific. He knows what he's talking about, and he knows how to say it. And Jess Silk was performing a set on his webcast, and I just thought she was wonderful. She's super talented. Her songwriting is just world-class, top-notch, and more than that, it's just lethally heartfelt and just so full of verisimilitude, like real life and heart.
It was relatable, the lyrical content, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was sort of about being down and everything, but then sort of pulling yourself out of it, which was cool. It was uplifting, as well as being, I don't know, a slight song about depressing subjects, but just being overwhelmed generally.
Yeah, so the track was called SWALK, which I think probably stands for Sealed with a Loving Kiss. Honestly, I think the writing was incredibly clever. I think it's really well written.
Yeah, I was surprised. You mentioned about you found it on like a punk podcast or stream or something.
Yeah, I guess that's loosely how most people would characterize Attila the Stockbroker.
Okay.
And, I'm sure she's comfortable within that realm and within that idiom, but I think really her writing elevates her beyond one genre.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would encourage you to listen to more tracks of hers because all of her songwriting is just really fine and really engaging.
I am going to, actually. I put it down. My first note is like, yeah, this reminds me of a lot of, I suppose, the softer punk rock songs. But even bands like Dropkick Murphys, it really reminiscent of that.
Yeah, I can see that, absolutely.
And the character in the voice, kind of, I mean, is it too cliche to say like Brody Dale Distiller style? But they're just a bit of rasp, bit extra to the voices. And that makes it more interesting to me.
Well, she's got all that character, but it's just I'm kind of grasping for the right word. It's synonymous with words like authentic and honest. When she sings, I just believe her, every word of it.
Yeah, it feels like it's a personal story. It's not telling someone else's story.
Yeah.
You listeners, go check out Jess Silk. She's really, really good.
Yeah, I'm going to have to listen to more. That's the only song I've ever heard from her, but yeah, I'm going to see what else she's got.
Yeah. Okay, so let's set some tracks for next episodes.
I have a quick question first for Dean.
Okay.
Go ahead.
You've got a tour coming up, quite a big tour of the UK.
Yeah.
Will Freddie be making an appearance? And if you don't know Freddie, that's Dean's guitar that talks, and not in the way of like Peter Frampton's guitar talking with a wah in effect. No. No, you need to see this.
It talks.
Yeah. So will Freddie be on tour?
It's something I always toyed with, bringing Freddie on tour, but the logistics of it just precluded that possibility. Also, I'm not sure he'd sustain life on the road.
No, that's fair.
He's an acoustic guitar puppet with eyeballs that roll back and forth and a mouth. And I use him sometimes when I do kids shows, and the kids get a kick out of him. And I guess you saw him on one of the webcasts that I did.
One of the live streams.
Yeah, the Dean zines. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I enjoyed Freddie a lot, I have to say.
Well, I always get a kick out of him as well. No, the tour kicks off in April in Wales, and then I'm all over the United Kingdom and Ireland between April and winding up in August at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival.
Yeah, that's a long tour.
Well, I go home for a part of it. I do it in two legs, so I don't do it all at once.
Right. You're playing places like the Bloomsbury Theatre. I mean, that's just fucking awesome.
It's a really nice venue, and I've played there many times in London. I'm pretty much all over the UK, so if you're listening, I'm probably playing somewhere in your backyard. And tickets to all those gigs are available right now on sale on my website in the gig section of my website, which is deanfriedman.com. I'm looking forward to it because I got to tell you, most of these dates have been rescheduled at least twice.
Yeah, that's the thing with COVID. I don't know. Yeah. Is that why you're not doing shows in the US at the moment?
My first US show is going to be in March, hopefully when things abate from the most recent surge.
Yeah.
I'm optimistic. When I canceled the first tour and, the beginning March 2020, there was no real alternative. I just had to get on the phone and cancel about 40 dates.
Oh, God.
Yeah, that must be painful to have to do.
Yeah.
It was pretty painful, but I did pivot quickly, and I got a camera for my desktop downstairs in the studio and started doing my live streams, and that's been a lot of fun. And I do them every Sunday, 8 p.m. UK time. But I am, as much as fun as it's been doing these virtual gigs, I really am looking forward to getting back on the road and getting on stage and sharing my songs with what's always been a really appreciative audience, particularly in your neck of the woods. And like I say, the first dates happen in April.
You're playing fairly close to me. I might have to pop up and see you.
I know. I was thinking we're going to have to try and get to one of these.
Yeah.
Well, give me a holler and I'll fix you up.
Oh, awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Luckily, we're pretty relaxed at the moment, our rules around gigs and clubs and venues.
Yeah.
Most of them, you just either have to have a recent test or
be double vaccinated, yeah.
Yeah.
Look, I'm optimistic about it. You never know what's going to happen, but, I jokingly have said that unless a giant meteor smashes into the face of the moon, precluding air travel here on Earth, I am determined to grab my suitcase and guitar, get on a plane, and start doing these gigs.
As long as everyone keeps wearing a mask.
Yes, wear a fucking mask. Okay, let's pick some tracks for the Astute Audio Insight. Now, I have got a track ready to go. I am going to choose Drop by Estrons or Eastrons. I'm not really sure how to pronounce it, but it's Estrons.
Interesting. Okay.
The band are not actually together anymore. They played for a few years, and then they played their biggest show ever at the Scala in London.
Terrible venue.
And then they broke up straight after that.
We'll check it out.
Cool. Yeah. Look forward to checking it out.
Dean, do you have another track do you want us to listen to?
One of my favorite singer-songwriters is a songwriter named Boothby Graffo.
Okay.
I don't know them.
He's a comedian, but writes some of the coolest songs. They're comedic in a way, but very surreal. He's one of my favorite songwriters. He's just got a bunch of albums. They're hard to find, but you can track them down. Some of his stuff is on Spotify. He writes really beautiful songs, and his production is really interesting as well. He's a great instrumentalist. He's a really fine guitar player. More than that, his songs will just blow your mind. They're funny, but also sad and beautiful. He writes about baseball playing spiders and
okay, all right,
cannibals, and really, it's hard to really characterize.
You've piqued my interest.
Graffo does. One of my favorite songs of his is called Bungee Girl.
Okay.
They're subtle, they're surreal, they're inspired, they're beautiful. And just go online. You can find them on YouTube or Spotify. A lot of stuff on YouTube. And his name is Boothby Graffo. Tell him Dean sent you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. We will check it out.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one.
Dan, what's your choice? What are you going for?
Yeah, I'm going to pick a track from a guy called Deuce.
Ooh, okay.
So basically, he used to be in the band Hollywood Undead.
Oh, Dan, don't do this to me.
But he's actually a producer, makes his own songs now. The lyrics and the lyrical content try to ignore. But actually, musically, I really appreciate the solo music he's making now. I go with, hell's gonna break loose. But as much as you can, maybe try and ignore the vocals.
Right, okay. Cool. So we got quite a wide range of tracks there. Be an interesting listen.
Yep.
Dean, where can we find you online?
You can find me on my website, deanfriedman.com, and Friedman is Friedman. And I'm also on all the streaming services like Spotify and Apple and Amazon, Deezer. But I will make a point of saying this. I encourage people to listen to my music all over the world on the streaming services, but never forget that those streaming services are stealing lunch money
it's true.
from every artist.
Yes.
We talked about this in one of our other episodes, actually, about,
Yeah,
the
you make no
ridiculous
fucking
pay.
money from streaming services.
It needs to be restated again and again and again until the public is educated enough to realize that musicians are being just pitifully ripped off by these streaming services, worse than even the record companies.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the people won't be able to continue making the music that people enjoy.
Right. And the result is I might get like a less than 1,000th of a penny for every stream. And, I get over 100,000 streams a month on Spotify, but that translates into about $150.
Gosh.
Yeah.
To all your listeners, if you enjoy the music that you're listening to, that you're streaming, stream all you want, but make a point of buying CDs and everything else direct from the artist's website. Not just me, but people like Jess Silk and Boothby Graffo and whoever else you're listening to. Just remember, they're not getting paid now. It's worse than it ever was. And if you want to support them and appreciate their efforts, go to their websites, buy stuff. That's my speech.
Well said.
I think that is a great note to end on. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you all so much for listening. Dean, thank you for joining us as well. This has genuinely been so interesting.
Thank you so much.
A pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me. You guys take care and keep doing what you do and, wear a mask.
If anyone has got anything that they want to say to us or that they want us to talk about, that do get in touch. All the details and all the links to do that will be in the episode's description, as well as a lot of links to Dean as well. Don't forget to subscribe, and we will see you in 2 weeks' time. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
What we don't want to do now is to pull back before we get that rather large proportion of people vaccinated. We've got to keep pushing to get it down even further. Don't declare victory prematurely. We still have a ways to go.
If you're headed to the grocery store to stock up on some food, try to keep in mind what rules apply. Have some consideration for your neighbors, don't be rude. It really isn't that hard to comply. Wear a mask, wear a mask. It isn't all that much to ask. Unless you want to wind up lying in a casket. Wear a mask, wear a mask, wear a mask. Though one day soon we hope they come up with a cure, along with an effective, safe vaccine. Until that day, we must endure by practicing social distancing and good hygiene. hygiene and wear a mask. Wear a mask. We must be equal to the task, or else in the viral mist of COVID you will bask. Wear a mask, wear a mask, wear a mask. We all long for the day this awful scourge will pass, and the virus will be gone without a trace. Until that day, don't be an ass. Keep that mask upon your face. And wear a mask, wear a mask. The concept isn't difficult to grasp, or you could find your health decline. You'll go out with a gasp. Wear a mask, wear a mask, wear a mask. Think about your parents and your parents' parents too. Think about the old man down the lane. This stuff is serious, this ain't no fucking flu. Anyone that thinks so is insane. So wear a mask, wear a mask. If you're heading to the pub to fill your flask, from London to LA, from Honolulu to Alaska. Wear a mask, wear a mask, wear a mask. Wear a mask, wear a mask, wear a mask.